2 years had nearly passed since our wedding, and only I knew the torment I had endured. Lips sealed, my heart's desires under lock and key, living day after day with someone who scarcely deserved me. My husband, Waleed, was the product of an arranged marriage. For 2 long years, I'd been bound in a relationship I had never chosen. It wasn't that I disliked Waleed, or that my parents forced the match upon me. The moment I saw his photograph, his strong jaw, his tall, graceful frame, I was completely captivated. Even in that still image, he seemed so magnetic that I couldn't look away. Soon after, my parents invited Waleed and his family to meet me in private, giving us the chance to speak freely. He and I sat together on the rooftop, chairs already placed for us. I assumed, as with any typical boy, he would launch into easy conversation. Instead, he sat as though he were the shyest girl, eyes cast down, fingers intertwined and gently fidgeting, one foot tapping ever so slowly. The sight struck me as utterly different, and to be honest, strangely attractive. Clad in a silver-gray pant coat, he looked like the most handsome man alive. His voice was soft, his manners impeccable. At last, gathering courage, I began asking questions, and he answered each one in that quiet, gentle tone. He told me he'd earned an MBA and worked for a prestigious company. His family was small, a younger brother studying in Australia, 2 older sisters who were already married, and a father who had lost his wife years ago. He'd come with his married sisters to meet me. He admitted he had few friends and preferred solitude, that he simply enjoyed being quiet and alone. I listened, fascinated, because I was his very opposite. Playful, mischievous, always ready to dance, sing, and make merry. When I learned of his simplicity, I laughed and poured out my entire story to him. He smiled and said, "Isn't it wonderful, Shermeen, that you've painted me in your own colors?" He looked at me just once, and that single glance captured my heart. I could feel a fire ignite in me. Blushing, I fell silent and slipped away down the stairs. It wasn't long before he followed, and after a brief farewell with his sisters, they departed. Later, Father asked me in private whether I liked Waleed. Without hesitation, I nodded, and my beaming smile banished all their doubts. The very next day, Waleed's sister called to say that he too had fallen for me, and so our arranged marriage was set in motion. Truly, it felt more like a love match than an arrangement. Over the next 6 months, we spoke on the phone every day. We grew so attuned to one another that we could finish each other's sentences without a word. Finally, the wedding day arrived. I donned the bridal finery, took Waleed's arm, and walked up to the wedding stage. It was, by far, the most beautiful day of my life. I had found the prince of my dreams, so perfect, beyond anything I'd ever imagined. My parents had truly made the best choice for me. Seated on the wedding dais, I waited for Waleed, and in a few moments he came and stood beside me. His shyness seemed as natural now as it had on our very first meeting. Even though we were already bound by marriage, he was still blushing like a schoolboy. I marveled at it. Shouldn't I be the one to feel shy? Yet his whole body trembled. When he offered me the ring as part of the ceremony, I held out my hand. But he couldn't place it on my finger, his hands shaking so badly. Flustered, he stammered, "I'm so sorry, Shermeen." I couldn't help laughing, and I squeezed his hand hard, teasing, "At this rate, our wedding night will be ruined." He stared at me in surprise, his eyes wide as if my words had wounded him. In that instant, I realized I'd spoken too boldly. In truth, after 6 months of nightly phone calls and endless conversations, I'd grown confident enough to joke with him like that, but his reaction startled me, and I hurriedly apologized as I let go of his hand. He stood up and excused himself to change. A little while later, he returned in his nightshirt. I simply watched him, taking in his quiet masculinity. He sat down comfortably on the edge of the bed and said, "Shermeen, you should change too." I glanced at him and said nothing, expecting him to help me remove my jewelry, lift my veil, slip off my bangles, and then draw me close. That's how I'd always heard a wedding night should unfold. But Waleed's manner was gentle, restrained, and entirely different. Silently, I rose and, with great effort, shed the heavy dupatta from my head. I unpinned my jewelry, laid my bangles on the bedside table, hoisted my heavy lenga, and slipped into the bathroom. After my shower, I returned and found Waleed sound asleep. Lying on his back, one hand under his head, the other resting on his thigh, he seemed utterly oblivious to my presence. All my excitement drained away. I crept onto the bed and nestled my face into my pillow, my cheek inches from his. Something in me compelled me to trace a fingertip along his cheek, but he stirred in his sleep, brushed my hand away, and turned over. The light rejection stung, but I was too exhausted to dwell on it, and soon I too drifted into sleep. The next morning, I woke to find him gone. I freshened up and stood at the mirror, brushing my hair, when the door opened. He slipped back in with a smile. "Good morning," he said, coming close. I wondered if he would apologize for last night, if he'd realized how hurt I'd felt. But he merely gave me a cursory glance from head to toe, offered a polite compliment, opened his laptop, and sat down to work. And with that, our first morning as husband and wife passed in silence. It felt as though, for him, my very existence, this marriage, were all perfectly ordinary. Nothing new, nothing special, nothing joyful. I glared at Waleed in frustration, but he didn't seem to notice. Another day passed like this. That night, when we were alone in our room again, I finally spoke up. "Last night you slept so deeply you didn't even realize I was here in the room, too." Startled, Waleed looked at me and replied, "Night is for sleeping," and I was utterly exhausted. I was incredulous. Without thinking, I draped my arms around his neck and said, "Night isn't just for sleeping, Waleed, especially not our wedding night." I was yearning for our union, and you fell into a deep sleep. I spoke my heart, casting aside all shyness. His face went pale in an instant. The handsome, fair features turned ashen. He quickly removed my arms from his neck and said, "Shermeen, it's not appropriate for girls to speak like this. I didn't expect such boldness from you." And with that, he got up and walked out of the room. The clock was nearing 2 in the morning. Seeing him storm off in anger reduced me to tears. I sat alone, wondering whether I had been wrong to speak so freely, or if his behavior itself was the real problem. Around 1 o'clock the next morning, he returned. Finding me crying, he sat beside me and said, "I don't want to rush our marital intimacy. Try to understand. You're new to me, and I'm new to you. First, we need to truly understand each other. Then we can move our marriage forward." I stared at him, astonished. "Walad," I said. "We've spoken every day for 6 months. We know each other so well already. Isn't our nikah itself the beginning of married life? If you weren't happy or if there was a problem, you could have declined the marriage." My tears grew harder and he grew uneasy. "Shermeen, it's not like that at all. I like you. That's why I married you. It's just that I don't appreciate girls being so forward. Please be more reserved." Then he patted me gently and coaxed me to lie down on the pillow. He stroked my hair until I drifted into sleep. The next morning, I awoke to find he had not given me what I felt was my right, but instead had found an excuse to lull me back to sleep. I couldn't understand why he was treating me this way. This pattern continued for a week. A week later, my married sisters came home. Unwillingly, I complained to them about Waleed's distant behavior. After all, both of them were older than he was. My eldest sister was silent for a moment, then gently advised, "Why don't you speak to him lovingly yourself? We're only your sisters. How could we ask him such questions?" Her response made me fall quiet too. It was true that no sibling could question her brother in that way. I understood that it was up to me to address this. They comforted me and left, and that very night I spoke to my husband again. But his answer was the same. He was not yet mentally prepared. 15 days later, I became so distraught that I felt I had to tell my family everything. When I returned home, Mother immediately asked, "Waleed is all right, isn't he? He's treating you well, right? You're not in any pain?" Her questions brought tears to my eyes, but I hid them. My parents had taught me to keep our marriage matters private. I assured her there was nothing wrong and went back, but my heart churned with unease. Something was amiss that I hadn't yet realized. In our house lived only my husband, Waleed, and my father-in-law, who worked and then shut himself in his room after returning home. So I spent my days alone. The house was large, a maid came to help, but once she finished and left, the emptiness would close in on me. One afternoon, feeling increasingly anxious, I decided to tidy Waleed's pre-wedding belongings in the wardrobe. That's when my hand brushed against something that sent my senses reeling. I never dreamed the truth could be so horrifying. It was a hospital file containing my husband's test reports. I carried it silently to the bed and began flipping through the pages. Then the earth dropped from beneath me. Years ago, Waleed had been in an accident that fractured the bones in his leg and one arm and caused internal injuries so severe that he lost his virility. The file held report after report of treatments he had pursued, but it seemed he had never fully recovered. Suddenly, his hesitation, his shyness, his distance, the way he'd called me shameless for seeking closeness, made sense. I wept for my misfortune. I, who believed myself the luckiest woman on earth, had discovered that despite having everything, I had gained nothing, for my husband was incapable of giving me joy. Nearly 8 months had passed since our marriage, only I knew how I had endured those months, and I never imagined I would have to live like this forever. Lost in tears, I didn't notice the time until the door opened. Waleed walked in early from the office, bag in hand. Seeing me hunched on the bed with the file, he strode over, his eyes falling on it. In an instant, he flew into a rage, snatched the file away, slammed it back into the wardrobe, locked it, and shouted, "Why did you open my wardrobe? Who gave you the right to spy on me?" His fury was nothing compared to mine. My patience had finally snapped. I stood up, grabbed his collar, and said, "Raising your voice won't hide your weakness. I never knew how profoundly you've deceived me. You are impotent, and you hid this from me. You lied to marry me, you deceived my family, and now you intend to silence me by shouting." The words tumbled from my lips before I could stop them, and in the next instant my heart nearly stopped, for Waleed collapsed to the floor, utterly unconscious. Panic shot through me. I splashed water on his face and called his name until finally he stirred and looked up at me. As reality washed back into his eyes, he began to weep uncontrollably. Clutching my hand, he gasped, "Sharmeen, you won't leave me, will you?" Between sobs, he confessed, "I kept this from you because when I first met you on the rooftop, I was so taken by your beauty and your fearless spirit that I wanted to trust you with everything. I've never lied for any other relationship. I always told the truth when families came to consider a match. But the moment I sat beside you, I felt you would fill every emptiness in my life. And in my selfishness, I married you without telling you how deeply broken I was. My heart was compelled by love. Please don't leave me. Hold me despite my weakness." His vulnerability broke my heart. I, too, loved Waleed deeply, so I drew him into my arms and we cried together for hours. We promised one another that no matter what storms life brought, we would never abandon each other again. After his sister's weddings and our mother's passing, he had grown so lonely. He spoke to no one, visited with no friends. If anyone was ever there for him, it had been me, and I knew that if I walked away, he might lose all hope. So I gripped his hand firmly and vowed to stand by him forever. A year passed, and the questions began. Relatives would glance at us meaningfully. Doctors' names floated into the conversation. I grew weary of the speculation. 15 months in, I realized we couldn't go on like this. Having children was essential. 2 years after our wedding, Waleed's sisters pressed me. "When will you share the good news?" Trusting them with my caution, I finally revealed the whole truth. They stared at me in disbelief, then embraced me, thanking me for not deserting their brother in his time of need. Then my sister-in-law shared an old home remedy from our mother-in-law. Give your husband 2 cloves every morning on an empty stomach and a date alongside. She'd seen it work wonders once, she said. So perhaps it would brighten our life too. I thanked her and the very next day began the regimen religiously. 2 cloves and a date every single morning for 2 months. But in the 3rd month, something changed. I felt persistently nauseous, dizzy, and heavy in my limbs. When my father-in-law noticed my condition, he insisted I see a doctor. He even called in my eldest sister to escort me to the hospital. There, the doctor ordered several tests and sent me for an ultrasound. My sister-in-law and I waited anxiously until our names were called. The doctor's eyes widened in astonishment as she viewed the reports, and what she told us next left us staring at each other, speechless. The doctor told me that it was unlikely I could ever conceive without a very long course of treatment. She wrote me several prescriptions and urged me to follow them diligently. tears welled in my eyes. I had gone hoping for better news, only to learn that my body would need months, perhaps years of medical intervention before motherhood could even be a possibility. My sister-in-law escorted me home, and my silent tears stained the pillows of my room. When Walid came back from work and found me weeping, his heart broke. He cradled me gently and said, "Shermeen, don't worry. This doctor has given you medicine. You will get better soon." His kindness soothed me enough to swallow my tears, and when it was time for my next checkup, he insisted on coming with me. On a whim, I suggested he, too, get examined. After all, the doctor was excellent, and perhaps he might benefit alongside me. He agreed, and the results were astonishing. Walid's tests showed him to be perfectly healthy, fully capable of fatherhood. In contrast, I still faced a long road ahead. Overwhelmed, I broke down on the hospital steps. Yet Walid wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "Trust in God. If I could recover, surely you can too." From that day forward, he tended to me with unwavering care. A year passed of faithful treatments, but my reports showed no improvement. Through it all, Walid was my truest companion. He never complained, never reproached me for the past, never reminded me of my struggle. Often I felt shame. He had endured the same hardship, and here I was weeping for the same pain. I had even called him deceitful in anger, yet he bore no grudge. Then one glorious day, the tests finally turned in my favor. I was pregnant. Our home filled with celebration, but more than that, my heart overflowed with love for Walid. His adoration was clear in every look, every gentle touch. News of our coming child delighted my sisters-in-law and my father-in-law alike, and before long our wider family gathered, united in joy. Sitting there with Walid by my side, watching our loved ones laugh and embrace, I realized, had I abandoned him when he needed me most, I would never have known this happiness. Marriage, I learned, is like wearing a single garment. Each must cover the other's imperfections, shelter each other's sorrows, and tend to each other's joys. I once concealed his deepest flaw. In time, he sheltered mine. Together, through love and compassion, we rebuilt each other, and today our home overflows with joy.